There comes a moment in every life when the soul grows tired of explaining itself to those committed to misunderstanding it. A moment when the heart realizes that not every knock at the door deserves an answer. Not every voice deserves a seat at the table. And not every presence is a blessing simply because it has been familiar. This is not a moment of bitterness. It is a moment of clarity. And clarity, once claimed, becomes a shield no toxic spirit can penetrate. Toxic people thrive on access. They feed on your reactions, your justifications, your guilt, your endless generosity offered without boundaries. They survive because you keep the door cracked open, hoping they will enter differently this time, speak gently this time, respect you this time. But hope, when misplaced, becomes a slow betrayal of the self. The truth is not cruel, though it may be firm. What you tolerate teaches others how to treat you. And what you finally refuse rewrites the entire script. The single most powerful act you can do, the one act that changes the way toxic people orbit your life, is this: you must decide that your peace is not negotiable. Not someday. Not after one more explanation. Not after one more chance. Now, once that decision settles into your bones, everything else rearranges itself. Your voice changes. Your posture changes. Your silence becomes intentional instead of fearful. You no longer argue with people who are addicted to chaos, because you understand that chaos is their language. And you are no longer fluent. Toxic people are disturbed not by your anger, but by your calm. Anger feeds them, calm starves them. When you stop defending your boundaries and start living inside them, something remarkable happens. You no longer need to announce your strength. It announces itself. You no longer chase validation. You no longer explain why something hurt you. You simply remove yourself from what diminishes you. This quiet withdrawal is not weakness. It is wisdom refined by experience. There was a time when you thought endurance was the same as strength. You stayed longer than you should have, listened more than you were respected, gave more than you received, all in the name of being kind, being patient, being understanding. But kindness without self-respect becomes self-erasure. Patience without limits becomes self-neglect. Understanding without boundaries becomes an open invitation to be used. You were not put on this earth to be a soft landing place for people who refuse to walk gently. When you do this once, when you choose yourself without apology, toxic people begin to lose interest. They sense the shift before you speak it. They notice you no longer respond immediately. Your explanations shorten. Your energy is no longer available on demand. You stop trying to correct their behavior and start correcting your access. And access, once restricted, changes everything. You begin to understand that not every battle is meant to be fought, because some people are not looking for resolution, only reaction. You learn that silence can be a complete sentence, and distance can be a profound form of self-respect. You learn that peace is not something you find, it is something you protect, and protection requires courage. Toxic people will test you when they feel you pulling away. They may accuse you of changing, becoming cold, becoming selfish. Let them. Growth often looks like betrayal to those who benefited from your self-abandonment. You are not responsible for maintaining the comfort of people who were never concerned with yours. You do not owe consistency to those who thrived on your confusion. The moment you stop explaining your boundaries is the moment they become real. A boundary does not need permission to exist. It does not need consensus. It only needs enforcement. And enforcement does not require shouting. It requires follow-through. When you say no and mean it, when you leave the room instead of raising your voice, when you disengage instead of defending your worth, you teach people how to treat you without teaching a single lesson aloud. There is a deep peace that arrives when you stop trying to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. That peace is not loud. It does not perform. It settles into your mornings, your breath, your sleep. It teaches you the difference between being alone and being at peace. One is empty, the other is full. And toxic people cannot survive in fullness. They need gaps to exploit, insecurities to press, doubts to amplify. Once you decide that your self-respect is sacred, your life becomes less crowded. Not lonely, but intentional. You stop confusing attention with affection, proximity with loyalty, history with obligation. You realize that time spent is not the same as time invested. You realize that just because someone has known you for years does not mean they know how to love you well. The power is not in confronting every toxic person. The power is in no longer needing to. When you stop participating in cycles that drain you, those cycles collapse on their own. When you stop explaining yourself to people who twist your words, the twisting stops. When you stop showing up where you are not valued, the disrespect loses its audience. You begin to move differently through the world. Your yes becomes rare and therefore valuable. Your no becomes calm and therefore final. You are no longer accessible to emotional chaos, manipulation disguised as concern, or criticism dressed up as honesty. You listen, but you no longer absorb what does not belong to you. You observe, but you no longer internalize the projections of wounded people. This is not about building walls so high that no one can reach you. It is about building doors and deciding who gets a key. It is about understanding that discernment is not judgment, it is self-preservation. Everyone does not deserve the same level of access to your heart, your time, your energy. That is not arrogance, that is alignment. When you do this once, truly once, with your whole being, you notice something subtle but powerful. You feel lighter, not because life has become perfect, but because you are no longer carrying the emotional weight of other people's dysfunction. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop anticipating conflict. You stop bracing yourself before interactions. Your nervous system begins to rest. Toxic people sense when they can no longer provoke you. They sense when their words no longer land, when their tactics no longer work, when their presence no longer controls your mood. And when they sense that, they either change or they leave. Either outcome is a victory. Because your goal was never to punish them. Your goal was to free yourself. Freedom is not loud. Freedom is waking up without dread. Freedom is speaking without fear. Freedom is choosing peace even when chaos invites you to dance. Freedom is knowing that you can walk away without explaining why you are done. And that kind of freedom is deeply unsettling to those who relied on your compliance. You will not become heartless by doing this. You will become whole. You will not lose your compassion. You will refine it. You will learn to offer kindness without sacrificing yourself. You will learn to love without bleeding. You will learn to give without depletion. And you will learn that protecting your peace is not an act of selfishness, but an act of self-honor. There is a quiet dignity that comes with no longer begging to be treated well. You no longer ask for respect. You embody it. You no longer chase understanding. You choose clarity. You no longer stay where you are tolerated. You gravitate toward where you are celebrated, or you stand alone in your truth until such spaces appear. And yes, some people will fall away. Let them. Some connections are seasonal, and some lessons are disguised as relationships. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. Some are meant to show you what you will never accept again. Some are meant to sharpen your discernment. Some are meant to teach you the cost of ignoring your intuition. When you finally listen to yourself, truly listen, you realize you always knew. You felt the discomfort. You sensed the imbalance. You noticed how often you felt drained instead of nourished. You just hadn't given yourself permission to act on that knowledge. Now you do, and permission once granted is irreversible. Do this once. Choose yourself without explaining. Protect your peace without apologizing. Enforce your boundaries without anger. Walk away without performing closure. When you do, toxic people will have nothing to hold on to. No reaction, no access, no audience. And without those, they fade into the background of a life that has finally decided to belong to itself. You were never meant to shrink to keep others comfortable. You were meant to stand tall in your truth, rooted, calm, unmovable. And when you do, the noise quiets, the chaos retreats, and what remains is a life shaped not by who tried to drain you, but by who you chose to become. Distance is clarity in its most honest form, because when you step back from people, places, and patterns, the noise finally lowers enough for truth to speak. Up close, everything feels urgent. Emotions blur judgment, loyalty confuses logic, and familiarity disguises harm. When you are standing inside the storm, it is difficult to tell whether the rain is cleansing or destroying. Distance gives you the vantage point that closeness denies. It removes the constant pull on your emotions and allows you to see what is actually happening, rather than what you hope is happening. Many people fear distance because they associate it with abandonment, coldness, or failure. They believe that stepping away means giving up or losing something valuable. But distance is not always rejection. Often it is self-respect choosing to breathe. It is the pause that allows the heart to slow down and the mind to catch up. When you are no longer surrounded by constant demands, explanations, and emotional expectations, you begin to notice how much energy was being drained just to maintain proximity. Distance exposes patterns that were invisible when you were too involved. You start to see who only reaches out when they need something, who listens only to respond, who thrives on your confusion, who resists your growth. These truths are not always loud. They emerge quietly in the absence of chaos. When you stop filling every silence with effort, the imbalance becomes undeniable. What once felt complicated suddenly feels clear. There is honesty in distance because it removes performance. When you are no longer trying to keep the peace, manage emotions, or maintain appearances, authenticity surfaces. You are no longer reacting, you are observing. You are no longer explaining, you are understanding. Distance strips relationships down to their essence. Without your constant presence holding things together, you see what naturally remains and what collapses without your effort. Some connections weaken with distance, not because they lacked depth, but because they relied on proximity rather than respect. Others strengthen because they were rooted in mutual care rather than control. Distance reveals which bonds are elastic and which were only tight because you kept pulling yourself smaller to keep them intact. In that revelation, there is no cruelty, only truth. Distance also clarifies your own role in what you tolerated. Away from the noise, you recognize how often you ignored discomfort to avoid conflict, how frequently you dismissed your intuition to preserve harmony, how many times you stayed silent when your voice was needed most. This awareness is not meant to shame you, but to free you. You cannot change what you refuse to see, and distance makes seeing unavoidable. When you create distance, you begin to hear your own thoughts again. Not the echo of someone else's expectations, not the residue of someone else's anger, not the weight of someone else's disappointment. Your inner voice returns, steady and honest. It reminds you of who you were before you learned to doubt yourself, before you learned to justify mistreatment, before you confused endurance with love. Distance teaches you that peace is not fragile, it is simply selective. It does not require constant negotiation. It does not beg to be preserved. It exists naturally when you are not surrounded by what disturbs it. This realization shifts how you move forward. You stop chasing clarity through conversation alone and start allowing space to do the work words never could. There is a quiet courage in choosing distance, especially when others benefit from your closeness. People may question your absence, misinterpret your silence, or label your boundaries unfairly. But distance is not meant to be understood by everyone. It is meant to be felt by you. It is an internal alignment that does not need external approval. Those who respected you will adjust. Those who relied on your lack of boundaries will resist. Distance is not about punishment. It is about protection. It is about recognizing that constant exposure to disrespect, manipulation, or emotional chaos slowly erodes the self. Stepping back is sometimes the only way to preserve what remains whole inside you. It is choosing to save yourself rather than continue explaining why you are hurting. With distance, emotions lose their intensity and gain perspective. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What once felt personal begins to look patterned. You realize that not every wound was caused by you. Not every conflict was your responsibility. Not every problem required your sacrifice. Distance allows you to separate your identity from the roles you were forced to play. In that space, discernment sharpens. You become more intentional with your time, more selective with your energy, more honest about your limits. You stop confusing familiarity with safety and history with obligation. Distance teaches you that love does not require self-betrayal and connection does not demand constant access. Clarity born from distance is not dramatic. It does not arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. It settles slowly, like light filling a room you did not realize was dark. You notice how your body relaxes, how your thoughts feel less crowded, how your emotions stabilize. You begin to trust your reactions again because they are no longer constantly triggered. Distance also reveals how much you were compensating, how often you were the one smoothing things over, forgiving too quickly, understanding too deeply, adjusting too often. When you step away and stop compensating, the imbalance becomes obvious. What required your constant effort to survive was never balanced to begin with. This clarity changes how you return, if you return at all. You come back with boundaries instead of apologies, awareness instead of assumptions, calm instead of urgency. Or you realize that returning would require shrinking again, and you choose to keep your distance not out of anger, but out of alignment. Distance is not the absence of love. Sometimes it is love refusing to self-destruct. Sometimes it is care choosing honesty over comfort. Sometimes it is the only language left when words have been exhausted and ignored. In distance, you learn that clarity does not always come from answers, but from space, from stillness, from the courage to step back and let truth reveal itself without interference. Protecting your energy is an act of self-loyalty because every moment you live is shaped by what you allow to touch your inner world. Energy is not something abstract or mystical. It is your attention, your emotional capacity, your mental clarity, your ability to feel present and whole. When you give it away carelessly, life begins to feel heavy, fragmented, and exhausting. When you protect it, life starts to feel intentional, grounded, and honest. Many people are taught to prioritize being available over being well. They learn to answer every call, absorb every emotion, solve every problem, and carry burdens that were never theirs to hold. Over time, this constant output creates a quiet depletion. You may still function, still show up, still smile, but something inside feels thinner, less alive. Protecting your energy is the moment you stop confusing obligation with love and endurance with virtue. Self-loyalty begins where self-betrayal ends. Each time you say yes when your body says no, each time you stay silent to keep the peace while your spirit feels violated, each time you engage in conversations that leave you drained, you abandon yourself a little more. These moments may seem small, but they accumulate. Protecting your energy means noticing these patterns and choosing differently, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it disrupts expectations. There is resistance that comes with this choice. People who are accustomed to unlimited access may feel entitled to your time, your emotions, your responsiveness. When you begin to protect your energy, they may accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of being selfish. But self-loyalty was never meant to be convenient for everyone else. It was meant to be truthful for you. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Protecting your energy requires discernment. Not every conversation deserves your engagement. Not every opinion deserves your consideration. Not every crisis deserves your emotional investment. Discernment is the ability to pause and ask whether something nourishes or depletes you. It is learning to recognize when your presence is appreciated versus when it is merely consumed. Energy protection often shows up as boundaries, but boundaries are not walls built from fear. They are filters built from wisdom. They allow what is aligned to enter and keep what is harmful at a distance. A boundary might look like leaving a room when disrespect enters, ending a conversation that turns manipulative, declining invitations that feel heavy, or choosing rest over constant availability. Each boundary is a quiet declaration that your inner life matters. There is a difference between being kind and being accessible without limits. Kindness comes from abundance. Overextension comes from fear. When you protect your energy, your kindness becomes cleaner, less resentful, more sincere. You give because you want to, not because you feel guilty. You listen because you are present, not because you are trapped. This shift transforms how you relate to others and to yourself. Protecting your energy also means honoring your emotional rhythms. There are days when you are open, expressive, and generous, and days when you need silence, solitude, and space. Self-loyalty is allowing yourself to move with these rhythms instead of overriding them to meet external demands. Rest is not laziness. Withdrawal is not rejection. Silence is not punishment. These are forms of self-respect. When you stop leaking energy into places that do not replenish you, you begin to notice how much more you have for what truly matters. Your focus sharpens. Your emotions stabilize. Your creativity returns. Your joy feels less fragile. Protecting your energy creates room for depth, for presence, for authenticity. You are no longer scattered across obligations that drain you. You are anchored within yourself. Many people mistake constant engagement for importance. They believe that being needed is the same as being valued. But protecting your energy teaches you that your worth is not measured by how much you give away, but by how well you honor yourself. You begin to understand that availability is a choice, not a duty, and that you are allowed to choose yourself without explanation. This act of self-loyalty also reshapes your relationships. Some connections strengthen because they were built on mutual respect. Others weaken because they depended on your overgiving. This is not loss, it is alignment. Relationships that require your exhaustion to survive were never sustainable. Protecting your energy reveals who can meet you in balance, and who only knew how to take. There is an internal shift that happens when you become loyal to yourself. You start listening to your intuition without questioning it. You trust your discomfort as information rather than weakness. You stop rationalizing what feels wrong and start honoring what feels true. This loyalty builds self-trust, and self-trust becomes a foundation that cannot be easily shaken. Protecting your energy does not mean withdrawing from the world or closing your heart. It means engaging from a place of choice rather than compulsion. It means showing up fully where you are respected and stepping back where you are not. It means understanding that your energy is finite and treating it as something precious rather than endlessly renewable. When you practice self-loyalty, you stop negotiating your peace. You no longer argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer chase validation from spaces that diminish you. You no longer feel responsible for managing other people's emotions. This release creates a sense of lightness, a quiet confidence that does not need approval to exist. Protecting your energy is also an act of honesty. It requires you to admit when something is costing you too much. It asks you to acknowledge when love feels heavy, when work feels draining, when conversations feel toxic. Honesty may disrupt routines, but it restores integrity. And integrity is what allows your energy to flow instead of fracture. As you grow more loyal to yourself, you become less reactive and more intentional. You respond instead of absorbing. You choose instead of enduring. You begin to recognize that peace is not found in controlling your environment, but in controlling your access to it. This awareness becomes a quiet strength that guides your decisions without force. Over time, protecting your energy reshapes your identity. You are no longer the person who is always available, always accommodating, always sacrificing. You become someone who is grounded, clear, and selective. This does not make you less loving. It makes your love sustainable. It makes your presence meaningful rather than obligatory. Self-loyalty is not a single decision, it is a daily practice. It is choosing rest when guilt tells you to push. It is choosing silence when conflict invites you to react. It is choosing distance when closeness demands self-erasure. Each choice reinforces the message that you are worthy of care, starting with your own. Protecting your energy teaches you that you are not responsible for fixing everything, carrying everyone, or explaining yourself endlessly. You are responsible for honoring your limits and nurturing your inner life. When you do, your energy becomes clearer, stronger, and more intentional, and your life begins to reflect the respect you have finally chosen to give yourself. When you stop explaining, your life begins to breathe, because explanation has a way of tightening the chest and shrinking the spirit when it is offered to those who were never listening in good faith. Explaining, at first, feels like clarity. You believe that if you choose the right words, the right tone, the right timing, you will finally be understood. You believe understanding will bring respect, and respect will bring peace. But over time, you notice that the more you explain, the more tangled everything becomes. Words multiply, misunderstandings deepen, and you find yourself exhausted not from living, but from justifying your existence. Explaining becomes a habit long before it becomes a burden. You explain why you are tired, why you need space, why something hurt you, why you cannot stay, why you have changed. You explain your intentions, your boundaries, your reactions, your silence. You explain to be kind, to be fair, to be seen as reasonable. But there is a subtle shift when explanation stops being communication and starts becoming self-defense. In that moment, your life begins to constrict around other people's comfort rather than expand into your own truth. There are people who do not seek explanation to understand you. They seek it to control you. Every explanation you give them becomes material. They dissect it, reinterpret it, question it, weaponize it. You leave conversations feeling smaller than when you entered them, unsure of yourself, replaying your words, wondering what you should have said differently. This is not dialogue. This is erosion. And erosion happens slowly, so slowly that you often do not notice how much of yourself has been worn away until breathing feels difficult. When you stop explaining, you interrupt this cycle. You refuse to participate in conversations where your humanity is treated like a debate. You begin to recognize that people who respect you do not require endless clarification. They listen, they observe, they adjust. People who demand constant explanation are often uncomfortable with boundaries, threatened by autonomy, or invested in keeping you uncertain. Stopping explanation does not mean becoming rude or dismissive. It means understanding that your no is complete without a justification. It means realizing that your feelings do not need to be proven to be valid. It means trusting that your experience is enough, even if someone else refuses to acknowledge it. This trust is where breathing begins, because your nervous system is no longer locked in a state of constant defense. So much tension in life comes from the fear of being misunderstood. You explain to prevent conflict, to soften reactions, to avoid being labeled difficult or ungrateful. But peace built on self-silencing is fragile. It requires constant maintenance, constant monitoring, constant self-editing. When you stop explaining, you allow discomfort to exist outside of you rather than inside you. You accept that misunderstanding is sometimes the price of authenticity. There is a physical sensation that accompanies this shift. Your shoulders drop, your jaw unclenches, your breath deepens. You are no longer scanning every interaction for danger, no longer anticipating how your words might be twisted, no longer preparing rebuttals for conversations that may never happen. Your body recognizes safety not because the world has changed, but because you have stopped forcing yourself to earn your right to exist as you are. Explaining often comes from a belief that you are responsible for other people's reactions. If they are upset, you explain. If they are confused, you explain. If they are disappointed, you explain. Over time, this responsibility becomes a weight you carry everywhere. When you stop explaining, you return responsibility to where it belongs. You allow people to have their reactions without managing them for them. This is not cruelty. It is clarity. Life begins to breathe when your energy is no longer scattered across endless justifications. You reclaim the time and attention that explanation consumed. That energy returns to your inner life, to your creativity, to your rest, to your joy. You begin to notice how much of your mental space was occupied by rehearsing conversations, anticipating objections, refining explanations that were never enough. In the absence of that noise, there is room for presence. Stopping explanation also changes how you relate to yourself. You no longer interrogate your feelings the moment they arise. You do not ask whether they are reasonable enough, acceptable enough, understandable enough. You allow them to exist without cross-examination. This internal permission is transformative. It teaches you that your inner experience does not need external validation to be real. There is a quiet power in responding less, not reacting, not defending, not clarifying every choice. Power does not announce itself, it settles. When you stop explaining, your actions begin to speak with more authority than your words ever did. You show people what you will tolerate by what you allow to continue, and what you will no longer accept by what you calmly step away from. Some people will push harder when you stop explaining. They are accustomed to your accessibility, to your willingness to translate yourself into something they find comfortable. Your silence unsettles them. They may accuse you of shutting down, of being distant, of changing. These accusations are often confessions. They reveal how much they depended on your explanations to maintain control or familiarity. You are not required to soothe their discomfort by returning to self-abandonment. Breathing is natural. It does not require permission. When your life begins to breathe, it moves with a rhythm that feels organic rather than forced. You stop rushing to be understood and start trusting that what aligns with you will meet you without persuasion. You learn that clarity does not always come from saying more. Often it comes from saying less. Explaining keeps you tethered to outcomes you cannot control. You explain in hopes of a certain response, a certain reaction, a certain understanding. When that response does not come, you feel frustrated, invisible, defeated. When you stop explaining, you detach from those outcomes. You act according to your values rather than other people's approval. This detachment is freeing. It loosens the grip of expectation and allows you to move forward without dragging disappointment behind you. There is also grief in this process. You may grieve the belief that if you had just explained better, things would have been different. You may grieve the version of yourself who tried so hard to be understood. This grief is part of the breathing. It is the release of an old pattern, an old hope that no longer serves you. Letting go of explanation is letting go of the illusion that clarity alone can fix misalignment. When you stop explaining, your boundaries become cleaner. They are no longer negotiations. They are statements of fact. You do not argue for them. You do not justify them. You live them. This simplicity is what allows your life to expand rather than contract. Boundaries that require constant defense are not boundaries. They are invitations for debate. Breathing life into your days means allowing things to be as they are without constant commentary. You do not owe everyone access to your inner process. Some things are sacred because they are private. Some decisions gain strength by being made quietly. When you stop explaining, you protect the tender parts of yourself from unnecessary exposure. You also begin to notice how often explanation was a way of delaying action. You explained instead of leaving. You explained instead of resting. You explained instead of saying no. When explanation falls away, action becomes clearer. You move more decisively, not because you are certain of everything, but because you trust yourself enough to adjust as you go. Life breathes differently when you are no longer trying to control the narrative. You accept that people will tell their own stories about you, and you release the need to correct them. This release is not resignation, it is confidence. You know who you are. You know why you choose what you choose. That knowing is sufficient. Stopping explanation creates space for listening. Not listening to respond or defend, but listening to discern. You hear what is said and what is avoided. You observe how people treat you when you are no longer performing understanding for them. This observation provides information that explanation never could. There is a gentleness that enters your life when you stop explaining. You are gentler with your time, your energy, your emotions. You no longer rush to fill silence with justification. Silence becomes a place of rest rather than anxiety. In that rest, you find yourself again, not as a role or a reaction, but as a presence. Breathing also means allowing change without announcement. You do not need to declare your growth or defend your evolution. You grow because growth is natural when conditions allow it. Explaining often keeps you anchored to who you were. Not explaining allows you to become who you are becoming. As your life breathes, relationships either adjust or fall away. Those built on mutual respect adapt easily. Those built on entitlement struggle. This is not something you force, it is something you witness. You learn that compatibility is revealed not by how much you explain, but by how little you have to. You begin to feel more at home in your own life. Mornings feel lighter. Decisions feel simpler. Even challenges feel more manageable because you are not carrying the added weight of defending your choices. Your breath moves freely because you are no longer holding it in anticipation of judgment. When you stop explaining, you give yourself permission to exist without commentary. You eat without justifying your appetite. You rest without justifying your fatigue. You change without justifying your growth. This permission is expansive. It creates a sense of ease that no amount of external validation could ever provide. Breathing life into yourself is an ongoing practice. There will be moments when the urge to explain returns, when old habits resurface. In those moments you pause, you notice your breath. You ask whether explanation is necessary or whether presence is enough. Often, presence is enough. As explanation fades, intuition grows louder. You rely less on external approval and more on internal alignment. Decisions come from a place of calm rather than urgency. You move because it feels right, not because you have convinced someone else that it is. Your life begins to breathe in the spaces where words are no longer used as armor. It breathes in the quiet confidence of action. It breathes in the acceptance of being misunderstood. It breathes in the relief of no longer carrying conversations that never led to understanding. It breathes in the freedom of letting go of the need to be palatable, reasonable, or acceptable to everyone. There is a subtle joy in this breathing. Not excitement, not triumph, but steadiness. A sense that you are no longer at war with your own existence. You are no longer arguing for your right to take up space. You simply do, and that doing is enough. When you stop explaining, you start living from a deeper place. A place where choices are made with intention, where silence is not empty, where distance is not cold, where presence is not performative. Your life expands into the room that explanation once occupied, and in that room there is air, and in that air there is space, and in that space there is a quiet, steady breath that belongs entirely to you.